when is it legitimate for a government to go, right, we need to hold a referendum? This is something that really should be debated, when the actual community has indicated in this last referendum, this is not an issue that we're so concerned about. It's more the bureaucrats in Canberra that's been on their radar.
The vote showed exactly that. All of Australia was 60-40 for the no's, but yet Canberra was 60-40 for the yes. So it just shows how out of touch Canberra actually is. This is quantifiably proven that Canberra has no idea what this rest of Australia is going through.
The shaved monkey has just jumped out of the picture and he's run off to do something very technical. Find the any key, twiddle with a switch or something. I don't know.
It's that left-handed screwdriver.
It could be, mate. Fantastic to have you, though, next to me. David. Try Derek. Who the hell's David? And what have you done with Derek? Derek Whittaker here.
I have no idea, Brian. You tell me. Can I call you Brian for the next...
You know what? Absolutely, yeah.
30 minutes.
I feel like I should be, part of the Family Guy now. All of a sudden, the shaved monkey is back. Of course, he's just fiddled with the switch.
Today, I want to have a look at. We recently had a thing called a referendum, and
I heard about that.
From a money point of view, it was interesting to hear the response after it had. Now, Australia voted against the voice and a big resounding no, and it was interesting to hear from the. Right off the bat, a lot of the no camp was saying we've just wasted so many millions and millions of dollars on this referendum. Now, it's interesting to see how much it was cost. I was saying that, it was in the 364 million range. That was kind of what the government's saying. I believe others are now starting to report that it could be even as great as $450 million of taxpayers' money that went to that. And a lot are saying, look, the government was out of touch. In terms of what
I don't think it's that at all. I think it's very, very simple. I think that Anthony Albanese wished to leave a legacy, about himself. That's really what I think it was. Otherwise, if they really genuinely cared about Aboriginal people, they would have gone through legislation. Now,
sorry, go on. No, I was just going to say, what I found so interesting. We talked about it on the show on Saturday, is that there was a big proportion, we don't know how many exactly, but a big proportion of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community that actually didn't support this either. And they were all told that they were race traitors, and they were all given death threats, and their families were given death threats. Since the weekend, Jacinda Price's parents have been egged and spat on and things like that. And this is happening by these young white liberals, not liberal parties, but young white lefties. It's ridiculous. So
it is ridiculous.
I'm personally sick and tired of people telling me what's going to help people of colour. I'm okay. It's all right. Australia's not racist. We're a great country. I don't need you to help me. Thank you very much. I'm good without your help. And this was so interesting that some of the strongest no votes came from areas where they had the biggest proportion of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders in that electorate. So that was huge. I will just say very quickly, you can bowl me, knock me over with a feather. Fremantle, so far on the results, Fremantle did not vote for it. Perth did.
Yeah.
Curtin, my area of Dalgate, the Netherlands, is very, very close.
Oh, Shaq, you racist.
Yes.
I don't know what's going on, Dalgate. The only thing I can put it down to is that Julie Bishop, who is somebody that I know, and I think that she's a wonderful person, but for some reason I can't understand, she was an advocate for the Yes campaign, and so maybe that was what took Dalkeith, Netherlands, and Claremont and all those areas, over the line. But blow me over the feather, seriously. Curtin went for it, Fremantle didn't.
But I think I raised this issue because Fremantle's zonings got changed a couple of years ago, so it started bringing in Auburn Grove, Coburn. There's a whole heap of other areas that are now very tradie orientated.
Sure.
So I have a feeling that might be the reason, because Fremantle only makes up a very small percentage of the Fremantle electorate now.
All right. Well, Jarek, let's talk about the financial side.
The finance side is how much do you spend on a referendum? I mean, what's appropriate? What is it? It's interesting that you were saying prior to this, Travis, in the lead up to the referendum, that a lot of the donations that were going to the Yes campaign were tax deductible.
Yes.
And that the No donations were not tax deductible.
They're not tax deductible.
Yeah, and there was even some misinformation about that as well. That's just, as I understand, it was cut and dry because one was being promoted by obviously the government, the Albanese Labor government, and the other one was effectively a fringe movement, the No vote. So yeah, they did not make it tax deductible. Quite disgusting. To me, that is just blatant corruption of the system.
Well, yeah, either way you look at it, which way, if you said yes or no, it was politics, right?
Of course it was.
The whole thing was political.
Yeah.
In relation to that. So I want to kind of talk and highlight the whole thing of, how much is how much to do this, because that was the whole response.
Let me jump in on that for a second and talk about blatant hypocrisy. First of all, if it's a fringe movement, so are lots of things. The Cat Haven is a fringe movement too, right? So, I used to donate to the Cat Haven. I used to go and give them biscuits and all sorts of things because I like cats. And, like any donation to a political cause should be tax deductible. Now, there was a hit piece done.
I support that.
There was a hit piece done on Jacinta Price about the 76,000 or 78,000, something like that she spent on flights and accommodation. Now, that wasn't put in any context. She's flying in from Alice Springs, which is a remote part of Australia. And even though Western Australia is arguably more distant, it's one flight from Perth across. But from Alice Springs, you've got to connect to another flight that you're going to come over. So her predecessor, who was actually in the Labor Party, I believe, her predecessor was actually the highest spending parliamentarian as well. But they've done this hit piece on her. But I've just heard a report from Sky News, and I'm not going to verify this because I don't know if it's true or not. But I certainly wouldn't be surprised. Travis's favourite airline, Qantas, apparently let all the Yes campaign advocates fly around the country free.
For free. Yes, that is confirmed. That was on the Sky News. It is absolutely true.
Now, what this happening at a time when flights were, for a lot of people, the prices of flights were inaccessible. I remember being quoted $4,500 to fly in business class from Perth to Sydney. Now, okay, I can afford that. I didn't end up paying that, but I can afford that. But, most people can't. And I saw economy tickets going as high as $1,500, which is just totally inaccessible to a lot of people. In the meantime, they're flying all the Yes campaigners around the country free of charge. What's the justification for that? And as a shareholder of Qantas, when exactly does shareholders get consulted about these political donations?
So I don't think they do, because people like Alan Joyce. So I've got to be really careful. I got so used to calling him by another name. He's a extremely powerful little leprechaun who pretty much tells the Qantas to go jump, and they do anything he says. Same with politicians. So I'm just on the ABC News website. They're saying that the referendum cost $450 million. But there was an article on, obviously, Facebook, which everyone knows is true and accurate, saying that it was $650 million. So whether that's a typo or not, I have to double check. But they haven't done the final costings for the referendum yet. And I highly doubt that includes things like the flights from Qantas, which were done at no charge. So in Australia, that if you give a service without a charge is considered a donation, and you still got to put a monetary value to it. So I don't think Qantas has done all that yet.
And it'll be a tax deduction. So the taxpayer, in part, will be footing the bill for that as well.
Well, they'll be putting the bill for absolutely everything. So this is a huge amount of money that was just... I'm really glad we all said no. I think the whole context behind this is full of shit. I'm not going to pull punches on this. I think it was stupid. It was terrible. It was a massive waste of taxpayers' money. And I think half the reason why it failed, at the moment, we have major cost of living issues going on at the moment. So why are we spending like an insane amount? I think it's the education budget is like $1.08 billion a year. Why are we spending half of our education budget, which is another industry like in Australia that's severely lacking at the moment? Why are we spending half of their yearly budget on a referendum that really isn't needed, when everything that they're asking for, there's already laws or sections in the Constitution that will allow for that to happen?
It's a fascinating thing, even aside of the referendum side, that the political donation space is really weird in my view, because there's always strings attached, right? You want to vote for me? I want your vote. Fine, here's a donation. Now rule in our way. That's how it comes across, and you get a tax deduction for the benefit of it as well. And I think it really comes into question this highlighting this whole issue of what's the future of political donations, or even just spending on asking when is it legitimate for a government to go, right, we need to hold a referendum. This is something that really should be debated, when the actual community has indicated in this last referendum this is not an issue that we're so concerned about. It's more the bureaucrats in Canberra that's been on their radar.
The vote showed exactly that. All of Australia was 60-40 for the no's, but yet Canberra was 60-40 for the yes. So it just shows how out of touch Canberra actually is. This is quantifiably proven that Canberra has no idea what this rest of Australia is going through. The referendum I would love to see happen in Australia is a referendum towards a Bill of Rights. Should Australia have a Bill of Rights, and what should it look like? I think that's a much more important referendum to have.
No, we actually had one, I believe, and it was and we turned it down, which again just totally surprises me. I don't understand it. Just like the Northern Territory had a referendum about becoming a state, and the people who live in the Northern Territory voted against themselves, voted against them having statehood, which just I can't understand. But then I don't understand a lot of things when it comes to the Australian apathy towards self-governance and self-reliance. But I will say I just don't know what to make of this whole thing when we know that a big portion of I don't know why we're using the term First Nations, or we've imported that term from Canada. We'll go with that for the moment. Why such a big portion of the First Nations people actually didn't want this. They actually said no. They had some real problems with it. They weren't listened to. They were ridiculed and called names. Now the vote has come in, and again, in those areas where they are the most represented, they had some of the highest no turnout in those electorates. And yet they're going to fly the flags, the Aboriginal flags, at half-mast and have a week of silence.
Isn't it great politicians that are shut up for a week?
Well, it'd be great. They should have like a whole lifetime of silence, but fly the flags at half-mast. Well, hang on a second. If you're Warren Mundine or Jacinta Price or any of the other, heaps,
80% that voted no,
thousands or millions of Aboriginals that voted no, why you don't want your flag flown at half-mast? You might actually consider this to be a success. So, on whose authority is the flag being lowered to half-mast?
You're 100% right. There is no authority on it, and they've just taken liberties. Sorry, I had to slip that word in. They've taken liberties with what you believe because they can, and there's no one there to audit what they're actually saying. I personally think Australia's in a massive amount of debt. There's heaps of industries that are extremely struggling. I think last time I checked, there was 30,000 homeless people in WA alone, and there's something like I've heard 150,000, I've heard 120,000 people that are homeless around Australia. We've got major issues, especially with the Aboriginal Heritage Act in WA, making it extremely hard for property developers to actually make properties to be released for people to live in. Why are we wasting so much money on something that legitimately no one wanted? We've just proven that is not going to change anything. And they've had the funding, the legislative control, and the communications for the last 25 plus years. Like, it was totally unjustifiable whatsoever. So I have no idea what Albanese was even thinking.
But I don't think the money should have been spent. I'm not going to draw the connections. I don't like when people do that. We shouldn't have done this when we have these other problems. So if we didn't have these problems, then we should have spent the money. No, the money shouldn't have been spent regardless. Even if we had a budget surplus, nobody was homeless, we had a well-funded education health system, and there was no issues, we lived in some utopian Australia, we still should have spent the money. It was a waste of money. It was a waste of taxpayers' resources. But I'm not against the idea of having more direct democracy, actually, like they have in Switzerland, where matters are brought up. And normally they're brought up at the election, right? So here are the things that you're faced with. And so you elect your party, but then when it comes to individual issues, you can actually vote directly on them. And that in Switzerland can be anything from taxes to how healthcare should work, to how immigration should work, etc. So that people have a much greater say in how their government actually operates. And I think that that's a great idea. And very interesting what you're saying, Joshua McCurry saying the Aboriginal cultural heritage rules haven't been rolled back like Roger Cook said he was. But there's another thing. When was there a vote on that in Western Australia?
It was done at the 2021 state election when everyone bent over, took it up the back pipe, and voted in Mark McGowan with like a 90% success rate.
People voted for the Labor Party. Now, we can agree or disagree on Labor Party, Liberal Party policy, but this was a major change to how Western Australia is going to work. And that's what I'm talking about. I think direct democracy, not necessarily referendums, because you're going to be referendumed out, but you can put this on the ballot paper as a specific question. Why isn't that happening? Maybe it should, because what we're saying is government gets into power and they all of a sudden think they've got a mandate to do whatever the hell they want to do. Meanwhile,
I think that's the problem there.
The healthcare system in Western Australia, I mean, because I haven't been there for a while and, you know, moved back to Sydney, and then every time I come back to Western Australia, and I know a lot of people that rely on the health service, and they talk to me about their waiting lists and what's going on, and I look into it, I think, what the hell is going on? Well, what is going on in Western Australia? You can't get your healthcare system right, but yet you can go and blow all this money on all these other things. And at what cost? You know, it's not just the taxpayers' cost. Those farmers, most especially the farmers in Western Australia, that have to try to navigate the ACH rules, absolutely horrendous. I'm actually surprised, as was Stephen, that Western Australia didn't vote even stronger no than they did. I think it's at 64%, but I'm surprised it's not actually even stronger.
So there's a really cool, because we're seeing a few people here that we haven't actually seen on any of these shows before. So Michelle, I just want to say g'day to you. Thanks for tuning in. There's a couple of interesting points here as well about the referendum has pushed people. Do you think the referendum has pushed people to believe politicians even more? Personally, obviously you lose things in the text, but that's a very, very interesting comment.
Bring the messages up so we can bring them up on air.
Okay, I'll have to hunt through it again. But the other one that's right here in front of me is, does Albo survive this?
I don't think so.
I don't think he will, but I kind of hope he does, because it's one of those things like if he runs out the next federal election, there's a lot better chance that Labor's going to lose some seats, and I can't see anything bad in that.
I don't think he will, because politics, you know, politicians, they want to be in power. And to be fair, who wouldn't want to be the Prime Minister? If you're in politics and you have the opportunity to go for it, you'd go for it, right? You'd throw anybody under the bus. Yeah. So if you're Tanya Plibersek, whose policies I really, really don't like, and just the way she comes across in Parliament, you know, remember she used to scream across the dispatch box. But if she's got the chance to become the Prime Minister, she's going to go for it, right? Yep. I think the Labor Party will push him out. And like, really, it was a humiliating defeat. It was suggested to me many times that he actually called off the referendum. He didn't do that.
Multiple times.
He must have known, you know, you're not answering the questions. The thing is that they're trying to describe this as though it's confirmation Australia's racist. But the thing is that originally Australians were like, yeah, okay, that sounds good, because Australians are pretty easygoing and they're pretty fair-minded. They don't want to see people having some substantial disadvantage or not being recognised. So originally it was 60-40 in their favour. And they've absolutely alienated this huge part of the electorate. Now, Anthony Albanese hasn't personally done this, but that side, that yes side, telling people that they're racist, they're dinosaur. What did Ray Martin say? You're either a dinosaur or a dickhead. Well, thanks.
Dickhead or a dinosaur.
Yeah,
dinosaur with a dickhead.
You're so knowledgeable, are you? I mean, all these insults and condescension that has happened, and I don't really think that Anthony Albanese can come back from that. And almost every member of the Labor Party cabinet, every one of those electorates just about, have voted no in big numbers. And Linda Burney, especially, you know, the minister, she should step down as well. Because not only did her electorate not vote for it, but a big part of the Aboriginal community are upset at what she's done and her handling of this. And as for Anthony Albanese saying that that reconciliation is still on the table, that reconciliation is still something that we should focus on, etc., we're not going to have another referendum about this until all of us are well and truly retired. Right? We had a referendum when I was a teenager about becoming a republic. We probably won't have another one for at least another 20 years that I can see.
We don't have one, that's for sure.
There seems to be more interest in us becoming a republic, but I don't know that for a fact. There just seems to be more interest in that. but we're not going to have one for a long time. The chances of this issue being brought up in front of a referendum again is not going to happen for a very long time.
All right, gentlemen, time for a quick break. We'll be back really soon. It's Edge, Radio Australia.
Look, it's really interesting what's happened with Australia's e-safety office. Stories just come out, and this is making international headlines. Back in February, they sent out a memo to a lot of the...
A Nemo?
A memo, not an emo, to X, which was formerly Twitter,
sure,
as well as Google, TikTok, Twitch, and Discord. And these notices were basically specific questions for the companies to answer about how they were handling child exploitation content that was being put on their platforms.
Okay.
What they've come back and done is they've actually issued a fine for Twitter, saying that
pocket change, by the way,
many of the questions left were entirely blank, and that they were broad. Google has been issued a formal warning for giving generic responses to specific questions.
Okay.
So it's interesting to see one on the relationship that they have with big tech, Australian government. You'll also recall that when Facebook decided to unlike Australian media back in the day, that it was a breakout for 24 hours or so.
Yeah, it was only a very short one.
Yeah,
but quite effective.
It was kind of flexing its muscles, saying, who are you to tell me what to do here? It's been a slap on the wrist for this.
Slap on the wrist. Come on, they squirted them with some water.
No, for X, the formerly known as Twitter. It sounds like the artist formerly known as Prince. That's what I'm thinking about. This 610,500 Australian, which is about 380,000 US, which is not a huge amount for a big
lunch money,
like
maybe
that.
at Twitter.
Not even. That's the change in the couch.
But given that, it's like, hey, please take this seriously.
Yeah,
because we can do more. So it's this really interesting tug of war between big corporates. And to put it in perspective, you think, well, it's just a social media company. When you actually look at the volume of money that goes through Wall Street every single night to trade these big tech companies, it is huge. Okay, these are the ones that control the NASDAQ. These are the ones that control the Dow Jones going up and down, and basically control the market. So it is the David versus Goliath.
Of course it is.
In an economic term, when you actually look at the GDP of Australia, which is quite tiny compared to the rest of the world, well, we're just over 1%. So, yeah, watch that space as far as big tech is concerned. But I'd also put into question, like, international business, you have to respect the laws of the other international companies. And this is one that when you go onto a website now, you have to accept cookies.
Yes, you do.
Right? And that was because of a ruling of the EU.
Okay.
Right. They were basically insisting that people need to know that they're being tracked with their information.
Okay.
So where does it go from here as far as Australia is concerned, and also big tech? I want to throw that to you guys at the moment.
Well, look, to me, the fine given...
It's not a fine.
Well, no.
It's a donation.
It is a donation. Look, I agree with the principle of fact of, obviously, we don't want child exploitation happening on any forum whatsoever.
Correct.
So, that's a very positive sign. But, these things have to be made in a worthwhile way. So not a small fine. And it has to be maybe ways that would actually really genuinely affect them, like a restriction on their advertising or something like that. I don't know. I'm kind of throwing ideas out there. But something meaningful.
Hey, Shaq, what do you think a realistic fine for these big tech companies should be?
On this issue, nothing. I don't think it should be fined at all.
Okay. How would you deal with it, mate? What's your thoughts?
Well, firstly, these companies they're not doing it themselves, right? They're not promoting this material themselves. We all know that this is absolutely disgusting and horrible material. We also know that there's been an absolute explosion in this material being traded online, from what we hear from law enforcement agencies. Sure. It is a crime and it needs to be investigated. But I'm just going to slightly pivot away from the question for a moment. If you guys remember, there was that young Canadian girl who was bullied online, and she ended up sending revealing photographs of herself to this person online. And he threatened, if she didn't do certain things, that he would expose her to her family and friends and all the rest of it. And in the end, she ended up killing herself, which was such a great tragedy. As a result of that, there was a call for tech companies to step in to minimize the harm caused to young people. And what did they do? They responded by having, hate speech rules and anti-bullying provisions online and all of those sorts of things that we complain about because we say they should just not be involved in this in the first place. Now, when it comes to this issue, they have some sort of algorithm that Google has and many of the other big tech companies have that I don't understand the technical aspects of this, but apparently that they have like this algorithm that can determine points on a picture so that when you send pictures through the email, it actually scans those pictures and then flags it if those points are likely or have something in common with points of reference that they have in their database. But that effectively means that the tech companies are reading our emails in some way.
Everything.
So is that what we want? So what the government is doing here is they're saying to the tech companies, it'd be one thing if they were saying to the tech companies, upon being made aware that this material is there, you need to take it down. That's fine. But if you're actually saying to the tech companies that you need to police this yourselves, well, that's really the government's job. And so to hold the tech companies responsible, what should they be doing then? Well, they're supposed to be, what we hope is that they're a company that's just running a website in which people communicate and send pictures and send text messages and all that sort of stuff. So if we're going to say we want you to regulate this, well, then we have to accept that the tech companies are going to have to be more involved and monitoring all of our communications to make sure that this stuff isn't out there. And, based on our prior experience since September 11, every time government has tried to infringe on our rights and take them away, they've used these two excuses. One, the protection of children, which we all agree with, and two, the protection of our security to get rid of terrorism. Those have been the two reasons given for their massive encroachment on our civil liberties. So again, what do we want the tech companies to do? If you're going to find them, obviously you think that they're not doing enough or that they should do more, right? So what do you want them to do that you'd be happy with?
There's another point that Shaq's just raised up here as well, because you got to remember platforms like Facebook, Twitter, YouTube were always platforms. Now, if they have to come through and start censoring and editing and modifying posts as they're coming up, there's an argument that they're now a publisher. They're no longer a platform. So then the if someone does put something up that is terrorist related and all that, the publisher, it's argued that the publisher then has legal liabilities for those posts. So effectively what you're saying is that these platforms cannot be platforms anymore. They have to be publishers.
So grey, because if you put government in charge of that, then you've got the encroachment on your privacy from government.
And then you can take it even further. There's supposed to be free media in America.
Yep.
Under Shaq can tell me which part of the freedoms of was it? Mental blank.
First Amendment.
Yeah, the media is supposed to be free from interference from the government. All of a sudden, if they are a platform, are they then considered media? And should the constitutional rights of the free press, come into play for Facebook?
Well, we saw, of course.
No, but hang on. But don't sort of distort the issue there. First Amendment says you've got free press. There are limits, and certainly the promotion and distribution of this type of material would not be allowed if CNN or Fox News or something was to put this out. That would not be okay. Right? They wouldn't be able to hide behind the First Amendment. But again, I think the issue is if we're fighting the companies, that means that we're saying the companies have some responsibility here. And I'm saying, well, what do we expect then that those companies should do? If Edge Radio sets up a forum online and we own the forum, not where you guys own that forum, and one of our users posts something that they shouldn't have posted, which is illegal, should Edge Radio be held liable for that? Or should Edge Radio simply be required upon being made aware that is on their platform to report them to a law enforcement agency?
Well, to me, it's the latter. It's the latter.
So I think if you're going to do that, then when you say, well, how much should they be fined? Well, what are you trying to achieve? What do you want the tech companies to do?
Yeah. But then you also look at, again, this is the point I was making, not saying that free media should be allowed to post anything they want. If we have to censor what's put into the chat platform, Are we still considered a platform, or are we then considered a publisher?
Yeah, look, so whenever you've got an open forum, obviously you're subject to so many different people's opinions. Then they don't necessarily become the opinions of the publisher, in my personal opinion.
Correct. So if it is still considered an open platform, and I was watching one of the lawyers talk to a woman, and he turns around and says, right, if I, as the judge, have a gun, I'm cleaning the gun, and I shoot myself, who's at fault? Is it the person that made the gun or the person that shot themselves? It's the person who shot themselves is at fault doing it. Whether it's an action intentionally, whatever, it's their fault. So the same sort of thing. If you get yourself pregnant, is the person with the bits that got you pregnant, is it his fault that he got you pregnant, or do you need to take responsibility for your actions? Again, going to this situation here,
hang on.
Is YouTube responsible for what gets put onto their platform, or is it the person that actually posted it? Is better identification for the people using the platform more required? So if someone does post something not allowed, you can go, right, this is a user, this is what they posted, then give that to the law enforcement, let the law enforcement deal with it.
Well, I think it's gone too far. The Twitter files have revealed that the FBI were looking at people's social media accounts, right? And asking and interfering with people's questioning of, vaccines and COVID and all that sort of thing, and saying, is this legit or not? They were questioning, as people were saying, the science. And yet people were going, hey, the science could be wrong here.
Has been in the past.
Yeah. And so I think, we've seen that extreme go.
Yeah.
Is that against First Amendment's rights as far as the US Constitution is concerned? I believe it was.
I believe it is. I believe it is, but that's exactly the issue I'm talking about. If you say to tech companies, you have an obligation to stop the spread of misinformation. You have the obligation to protect the health and safety of the users, etc., etc. You need to require everybody to register and prove who they are before they can go on platforms. That wasn't the internet that we grew up with. When we grew up, before we had all this, we had old IRC chat rooms and IQ, what it was called, IQ something. Yeah, we were going on to those, and nobody knew who you were. So now all of a sudden we're saying, look, everyone needed to know who they are. There's no more anonymous stuff. You can't just go on and be a troll and just be an idiot, which lots of people, for whatever reason, find some fun in doing. And we're going to hold tech companies responsible for it. Well, then what do the tech companies do? The tech companies then have to become more adherents to big government. So the big government says, this is what we want everyone to do. We want them to get a vaccine. Of course, the tech companies are going to say, absolutely fine, no problems. Yeah. The government says everybody has to get a vaccine. We're going to promote that, and we're going to take off any information that contradicts that, which totally circumvents the whole reason why the internet was there in the first place, which was that people could have discussions, open discussions, and communicate, debate, talk about all these sorts of different issues. And mostly it was an anti-government type thing. It was a democratization of information. Originally, the internet was not something that people were going to make money out of. It was just a way for people to share information about all sorts, of things. Now, if we try
cryptocurrency of information,
wasn't the internet created by the US military?
Yes, exactly. But when the internet first started being a thing accessible to all of us, the whole point was that one of the advantages was we could communicate with people far and wide very freely, and often in criticism of government. Now, if you start making the tech companies, be responsible for all this stuff, we lose all of that freedom, and now the tech companies are just an extension of the government of the day. I have a big problem with that. It's not because I think this stuff is great. I think it's awful what's going on, but I don't think this is a solution that's going to solve that problem.
And it's not just restricted to big tech. We're seeing this rollout happen to other organizations that are doing the policing of their clients now. For instance, the whole know your client rules, what the banks are insisting upon, what the lawyers are now having to do, the accountants, the amount of questions that accountants are now required to ask their clients. It's just ridiculous.
It is, absolutely. It's 1984.
Yeah, exactly. We want government out of our business. If you commit a crime, fine, the government should prosecute you. I think that's absolutely correct. Government should prosecute you. And government should do
perhaps just a simple, nothing simple, but a system of mandatory reporting of crime from a social media company. But then, of course, what is defined as a crime, and we go on and on and on. But I mean,
the other
certainly,
thing is,
but
it's
certainly
a
they're not
platform.
negotiable. But they're not negotiables. The things like, child abuse and pedophilia and all that sort of disgusting stuff. That to me, that all should be mandatory reporting.
Well,
But it already
I wanna
is.
have-
That's the thing, it already is mandatory, right?
Yeah.
If they're aware of it, it already is mandatory, including even if you're not a tech company. If you're aware of this, if you're aware of a child in danger, or you've come across this sort of material, you're supposed to report it. What we're doing here is we're requiring them to do more. And that more is ultimately going to mean more monitoring off us. Yeah. And what government does, this is how they start. They start by saying, we're doing it for your protection or for the protection of vulnerable people in our society.
Or your health, you'll do this.
When you take that to extreme levels, when they were having the inquiry about the January 6th peaceful protest or insurrection, depending on which side of politics you want to be on, okay, when they had that inquiry in Congress, the media footage was cut from some tech platforms because of the spread of this information. So people couldn't even hear the arguments that were going on in Congress in the United States. I think that every person in America should be able to see what the government's doing at all times and on all platforms.
Otherwise, you're defeating the whole purpose of a public gallery.
That's right. Transparency needs to be first and foremost.
And one thing I do think Australia's got right in regards to the public galleries and all that is parliamentarian privileges. When you're on the floor of Parliament, anything goes. And I think that's something that they did get right.
Yeah. Okay.
So,
well, I don't know if that's
and there's
the case,
no legal ramifications.
Think of what happened with. Now, I'm sorry, I can't remember his name now, but okay, the gentleman who was sued, the senator who was sued.
Leinhelm.
Okay.
Yeah,
right.
No, but the difference is he made the accusations on the floor of Parliament.
Yep.
Then he went and repeated it on multiple media platforms.
Okay. Now
so,
that
prime example, Mark Latham at the moment has made a few accusations against One Nation, but he refuses to repeat them outside of Parliament, so One Nation can't take any action against him.
Gotcha.
So he's making some really nasty accusations against One Nation.
So politicians then, if I'm understanding you correct, that you're okay with this. So politicians can hide behind parliamentary privilege in order to say things that if any of the rest of us was to say, we'd be sued over. And we're okay with that.
I'm so not okay with that.
No, I am, and here's why.
Right.
Because my problem is with politicians sucking up to power brokers behind the scenes and not representing. Politicians need to represent the people. They need to have an open platform where they can say what the people are thinking without the fear of persecution and misinformation, lawsuits, and all that sort of shit. So if you get the right, let me finish, Shaq. If you get the right politicians and the people who vote for the correct people to represent them, they should be able to sit on the floor of Parliament and say things like, Brian Burston, who has now paid out a lawsuit, so I can say this without getting sued, sexually assaulted his staff members without getting sued for defamation, which Brian Burston did to Pauline Hanson when she accused him of sexually assaulting his staff members.
Right.
Now, should Pauline Hanson, if she said that on the floor of Parliament, should she be persecuted for representing people who have been assaulted by members of Parliament? And should she be censored for standing up for people who have been hard done by and done the wrong thing to?
You accuse me of being a lefty, so let me just make sure that I.
So you got to remember, I'm a free speech absolutist. That's
right.
So I think there needs to be a platform.
Right. So your idea of being a free speech absolutist is to say that the person who represents the people should have the ability to freely express their views, but the people themselves shouldn't have the ability to freely express their views. I'm not saying you should take away parliamentary privilege. I'm saying you should extend that privilege to everybody.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I 100% agree with you on that one, Shaq, and that's why we need a Bill of Rights in Australia to have absolute free speech.
Okay, in the US, right? Okay, there's the absolute. That is the country that has exploited being litigious more than anyone.
Actually, no, Australia's worse than the US.
Yeah, I know statistically that. But I mean, okay, the famous, McDonald's cup of coffee. You're not going to carry.
Yeah, that's just stupidity.
But people tend to sue in America. Okay, which is it's a horrible shame. But is it a consequence of this free speech? Do you know?
So I think that's the problem with the legal justice system, not in the free speech, because the company in question should have been able to say, right, you know what? They've gone through the bullshit court system. They should have their and this is another thing that I think should happen. I think justice should be free. I don't think there should be a charge to be going to courts. And I know the courts are going to get bogged down with a whole heap of petty crimes and all this sort of shit. But people need to be able to have, like I said, their ability to defend their case, and it should be able to defend their case in a court with a jury of their peers.
I often say,
so in the McDonald's case,
justice. How much can you afford to buy?
Exactly. So there shouldn't be a charge for it. So in the McDonald's case, McDonald's should have been able to go, right, I want to put this to common sense court, or call it whatever you want. I don't give a shit. They should have had a jury of about 10 people or 20 people in there. They say, look, she asked for an ultra hot coffee. She got it. She poured it on herself. Now she's suing us. Who's at fault here? The person who followed instructions to make the ultra hot coffee, or the person that spilled it on themselves?
Hold up. With that McDonald's case, and I'm not here to defend McDonald's, because, by the way, McDonald's is open 24 hours a day, are always closed between like 2 o'clock and 4 o'clock in the morning for cleaning. And then you go there and say, well, you're not really open 24/7 then, are you? And they're like,
no,
well, we are open. I'm like, but you're open in what way?
We're always open, but we're not always
closed, so I can't come into the restaurant and I can't order a burger. So in what way you're open? Like, well, you're welcome to like drive through the drive-through. I'm like, and what? And then just talk to you. I didn't come here to have a conversation. So I'm no defender of McDonald's. In that particular case, as I understand it, the McDonald's were warned on repeated occasions that the coffee that they were making were too hot and was in breach of the standards or regulations or whatever. And so when she then burned herself and obtained injuries as severe as what they were, it was as a result of the coffee machines being too hot, which McDonald's was repeatedly warned about, and that's why they settled or had that judgment against them. But
let me ask you a question then. Is that McDonald's fault or the manufacturers of the coffee machine who's had the settings too hot? Or the maintenance person who's in charge of maintaining the coffee machine?
If it's McDonald's fault in the first place, if McDonald's thinks it's the manufacturer's fault, they should enjoin the manufacturer into the complaint. But the consequence, though, and this is why we have such ridiculous rules now, the consequence is that for our health and safety, you can't order an ultra-hot coffee should you want one. So if you go out to a cafe or a restaurant and order a coffee, it's normally kind of lukewarm or, sort of just warmish. It's never really piping hot like you'd have at home. So, this is the consequence of this over litigious society, is that bit by bit our freedoms get taken away from us by companies trying to prevent themselves from being sued. And this is what, to come back to the tech question, this is what will happen if you start issuing big fines to the tech companies. What you'll end up doing is you'll end up taking away our ability to communicate freely without being constantly monitored by the big tech companies and government at the same time. And not just our government, but because we're going to be monitored by all these foreign governments. And when I just went to the United States earlier this year, I had to renew my ESTA, my visa waiver ESTA program. And one of the questions that were asked, which wasn't asked last time, was, what are your social media profiles? I was gobsmacked. What difference does it make what my social media profiles are? It should just matter. Do I have a criminal record? No. Am I a terrorist? No. Like,
they actually ask if you're a terrorist.
No, those are questions. Are you a terrorist? Are you a known, international drug dealer? What? I mean, even if you were, you're not going to say yes, then are you? But they ask those questions. They ask if you're a criminal, which I'm obviously not. Presumably, they check that with the country that you're coming from, and then all of a sudden now they're asking for social media. What does my social media have to do with it?
It's got nothing to do with it, and they're just overreaching.
So have I won you guys over? Because you guys all started saying the fines weren't big enough, and it was a drop in the ocean, it was a slap on the wrist. So have I won you over that we shouldn't be holding the tech companies responsible?
No, you've won me over on that one. I actually agree with you. I just want to make sure that there is actually mandatory reporting of this disgusting stuff. Yeah. Simple as that. The reality is we could have a conversation for days on this, gentlemen, but we're running out of time. So I'm going to throw to Derek to wrap up the show, mate.
Are we over already?
Oh absolutely.
We have so many things to talk about.
It's all good.
Sorry, Derek.
Well, before we wrap up, let me just say it's been a great result for Australia and New Zealand. The referendum, well, I won't say that I think it's a great result, but that's apparently what everybody else thinks, because I'm not going to tell you how I feel. But the referendum was defeated, and Jacinda Ardern's party has been like, you're gone. In New Zealand.
It has in New Zealand as well. Well, why are we talking about this on a finance show? Politics is a big influence on finance. And of course, you can see that how businesses can run or can't run, as the case may be, as we've discussed today. I hope you've got something out of the greater wealth.